everybody, welcome and thanks so much for joining us on episode 5 of IFMA's FM COVID-19 webinar series. We've got an awesome panel lined up for returning to the workplace. A few housekeeping items. If you'd like, you can check out the Coronavirus Resource Center on ifma.org/coronavirus. And there we have this episode and all previous episodes, as well as a lot of other useful content regarding the coronavirus. Also, towards the end of the session, after the panelists have presented, we'll have an extended Q&A, and we've had a lot of great questions already come in, so we'll take some time to answer those. Now I'd like to introduce our panel. We have Jackie Shook. She's the Global Planning Director of Fordland, and she's responsible for campus events, environments, including master planning, facilities, interiors, exteriors, and the overarching workplace experience. And then from Gensler, we have Don Ricker, the Strategy Director of Gensler's Detroit office, and he leads workplace transformation with key strengths in organizational and workplace strategy, design, and change management. Also from Gensler, we've got John Jordan with us. John's an architect and urbanist with more than 2 decades of professional experience in Asia, Europe, and North America. So welcome to episode 5, everybody. All right, and now with that, I'd like to turn it over to Don Ricker to present on how to help us all return to the workplace.
Great, thank you. And thanks to IFMA for allowing us to share our information. We hope you guys find this as a valuable session. As we've been talking about the post-COVID world, there's a lot of things to consider, and we'd like to share with you a couple things specific to some of the emerging trends in what's happening in space in order to help get people back to work right away. Also starting to leverage some of the lessons learned that are coming from China, and John will be here to share with us a little bit about his experience from Shanghai and how that office is beginning to respond to the return to work. And then we'll talk more about change communication and how we're starting to hear from clients and end users such as Jackie Shook, who will tell us a little bit about how they're communicating to their employees and what their platforms and programs look like. So with that, we're happy to share a little bit about some of the work that Gensler's done around the world and how we're working with some of our clients to help them with some of the challenges of getting folks back to work. So let's talk a little bit about some of those trends. As everyone can imagine, and everybody's already realized, this pandemic has turned our world upside down. Everybody got a crash course in working from home right away. And with that comes a lot of different challenges, but we're hearing a lot of different things about how that's working for folks. And I think a lot of the trends around getting people back to work is going to be focused on what should that workplace start to do. Clearly, the ideas around safety, security, and a healthy environment are all part of the mix. And there's really only so much space can do. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a combination of policies and procedures and all the things that everybody's starting to look at across all of the different companies. So when we think about the return to work, it really begins, as we're saying, at the lobby. So there's a lot of challenges that buildings have, and we're learning from some of those challenges in parts of the world that are going back to work. Things like having infrared screening systems as the future of lobby design, things like automated and voice activated entry doors are also part of the possible solutions. And while the jury's still out on certain levels of air purification, we're working with engineers to better understand what the opportunities and the possibilities might be. We know that air purification is going to be we think part of the mix, not just at the building level, but also in the workplace itself. And as we start to think about the workplace specifically, I think some of the low-hanging fruit or easy things to do when it comes to how to leverage collaboration space, how to start thinking about your existing meeting rooms are pretty some obvious things, like starting to swap out perhaps half of the chairs. So let's start looking at de-densifying the work environment, both from a seating perspective in the conference rooms, but also out in the desk area as well. And I think it's safe to say that with the crash course that the world got in working from home, collaborative virtual collaboration and the ability to work from home isn't necessarily going away. We believe that's going to be part of the mix of how people will migrate back, but also for the long haul. Everybody's figuring it out in different ways, and there's a lot of things to learn as we continue to work from home. I mentioned this idea of migrating back into the work environment, and we know that that's going to happen in a lot of different ways. Some of the things we're hearing about that have been successful to help stop some of those bottlenecks at building lobbies includes waves or shifts. We're starting to hear about building owners coordinating and collaborating with their tenants to identify timelines for when their employees might be moving in and out of the lobbies, so that they can start to leverage elevators and think of the building and the stairwells in different waves and shifts as well. So it isn't just about people coming in, but it's also about maybe pieces of the organization moving in as well. Other things to consider, again, ideas around spreading desks out, but also thinking about what to do with certain heights of panels and things like that in the work environment, which I think is an interesting topic, and one of the questions that we've had along the way, and some folks have been emailing in here as we're in the midst of the webinar. But this idea around what's the appropriate height for a panel. If you look at the science behind how far does a sneeze travel, you know, it's 20 some odd feet. So raising a panel isn't going to stop that. Thinking through what's an appropriate height has a little bit more to do with the individual and creating a comfortable environment for them. So I would say your best bet is to, you know, keep with this idea that the work environment is a place for people to see one another, to know that they're not alone, and at the same time create that visual privacy that they need. But it's not about raising the panels back up to 6 feet. I think we've passed that as a culture in offices. So that's just something important to consider and to keep in mind as we go forward. And I also, we've talked a little bit about, you know, how the world has been shifting toward work from home, and this idea around dynamic seating or shared desk seating is still going to be a topic. I think what we'll see as an immediate return will be closer to this idea that everybody has an assigned desk, and or if you start thinking about shifts, we'll know exactly kind of who sits where for a while, and that way we can keep an eye on the hygiene of the desk and leverage custodial services, and we'll know a little bit about kind of where people sit. So I think we'll start to see then a remigration to the desk sharing, maybe after a cure or after you know, a vaccine is developed, so we can kind of eliminate that from people's concerns. I mentioned hygiene. You know, when it comes to desks and it comes to cleaning and custodial services, all of that is clearly going to be on the rise. And I think there'll be a lot of different ways that we can learn from healthcare about how they're working and how they're leveraging different technologies as well as cleaning supplies. I don't know how far this particular concept will go, but you know, we have researched a little bit about ultraviolet robots, things that are being used in healthcare environments for sanitation. So this idea around UV scanning is definitely a possibility for the future. But again, it's the cost versus the investment of custodial services versus machines. Again, these things will all be figured out. But I think the good news is we're continuing to learn from healthcare, and we're learning more about what their safeguard measures are, and all of that will help inform the future of the workplace. And again, as all of these things come to fruition, the office will be completely redesigned, right? There'll be things that we hold on to as legacy. There'll be things that we kind of repurpose or reuse, but we'll start to see things like zoning of areas within the office. We'll start to see that there'll be areas where perhaps desk sharing is that zone or that place that happens, but maybe there'll be more assigned zones or places for those who are in the office on a more regular basis. And I think this idea of work from home as an ongoing practice is really going to define what the capacities of the new office needs to be. But in the meantime, we're doing some planning studies with some of our clients, and what it's yielding is somewhere between 30 to 60% of the occupants can return day one. what that's starting to do is show that there's actually still a net need for the space. So we're not expecting it to decrease or increase just because maybe things get spread out or things get a little larger, but rather it'll be more of a net need for similar to what you have today, just fewer people. So as we move into some of those ideas around planning, we can share a little bit of our thoughts about what some of those studies have yielded. And I think it's important to note that these studies are for some clients who have specific types of guidelines. So this isn't necessarily a solve all problems, but it's definitely showing some visuals that start to get your head around what distancing looks like in the work environment. So I think it's safe to say that the pendulum is swinging. It's going to continue to swing. And right now we're in a mode of this, how do we get ready for this return to work? So the RTW pendulum is swung, and we're hearing a lot of things, a lot of policies that people are starting to think about. Things like percentage of people in the office, sizes of workstations, quantity of rooms, things like that that are driving some extremes. And we know that we're in an extreme moment, right? We don't have final information from the CDC. We don't have a final determination on what the final appropriate distancing might be. So for now, we're sticking within the socially acceptable 6-foot distancing. And we know that the pendulum is going to swing back somewhere between where we've been and where we are right now, and we're going to renormalize. And as I mentioned earlier, we believe that return to work or the work from home is really going to be part of the future. So with that, I'll share with you a couple different ideas around, how space is going to impact culture, social interaction, and ultimately some of the behaviors that we will expect from the future. But to do that, we'll take a quick look at an understanding of that workplace as a system. So we know that each of these components are part of why people actively go back to the office. And when we start to look at what that system is, let's talk about it through the lens of how people get there. So they arrive, right? So we can start to expect how employees, visitors, et cetera, all access the work floor. And those are the things that we'd expect to find, right? It's a reception space, there's some kind of hospitality, there's always that waiting zone. And then people migrate into the work and the meeting spaces, and they are there to focus and they're there to collaborate. And we start to find that those types of spaces are designed around efficiencies and flexibility, different ratios, this idea around planning for work teams or neighborhoods. And those pieces all start to work together. And connected to all of that are the support things, right? All the support things that everybody needs. Today, we're talking about it through the lens of what copy, print, storage, aspects of wellness in mother's room. So those are the things we expect to find today. And connected to all of this is the social aspect, right? The social can be everything from your pantry to your community areas or game areas, cafeterias, et cetera. So when we think of the workplace as a system, this is a snapshot of kind of the now. It's sort of the today moment. And oops, pardon me, click back. But when we start to think about what the impacts to those spaces might be in the future or in the near future, we can start to think of that entry having that touchless doors, so voice activated entries or motion sensor type arrival spaces. We're talking about mudrooms or wash areas, places where visitors can come in and sort of prepare to be within the work environment. I talked a little bit about ultraviolet scanning and things of that nature. Whether that happens in those spaces or others, still to be determined, but things that we're beginning to see as possible emerging trends. When we get into that work and meeting zone, again, this is really starting to look at de-densifying. It's starting to look at this ability to really leverage flexible desking, allow people to shift and move that desk so that they're not actively facing one another. And we'll see a greater move toward comfort over efficiency. So I think with adding more space around people, we'll really start to feel and sense that idea of comfort and know that I have team members near me, but maybe they're not going to be right next to me in that hyper efficient, super small desk that maybe we've been leveraging for so long. So those are the types of things that will change. When it comes to support space, again, we're thinking more along the lines of systems and technology. So I think to enhance the idea of things we need. We're also going to have that air purification systems. We're going to have to think about the custodial and the cleaning services, and we'll definitely start to see sanitation stations. Again, I think some of these things are kind of obvious, but it's nice to see it organized in a bit of a checklist, and these are the things that we're anticipating. When it comes to those social areas, again, we think we're really going to start to find this increase in different types of usage. So we're expecting maybe larger pieces of furniture as to a bunch of small pieces, things that are easier to clean. We'll definitely see a greater dependency on maybe food delivery as opposed to food prep within the work environment. So maybe things will be a little more prepackaged when it comes to cafes, cafeterias. But we're also expecting in the meantime to see fewer guests, and it'll be really more of a focus on the internal culture. So again, just some ideas about ways we're starting to see that environment shift. And then here's a couple metrics just to kind of codify it. Circulation can begin to double. We'll start to see different percentages of occupancy for desking, so we'll see a reduction for sure. And then same with collaboration, but these things, the collaboration and the desking kind of work hand in hand. And a quick example of how that's worked for one client's set of guidelines is this model right here. This is looking at 6x6 desks. It's looking at 70 actual seats within a 9,800 square foot area, and so we're at about 140 square feet per person. When you start to apply those ideas around doubling circulation and reducing occupancy and spreading out the desks, you can start to see the difference from 140 to 235 usable square feet. So again, these are just putting some measures in place right now that allow for those flexible environments to be used in a way where we can get a good percent of people in, but at the same time leverage all the things that we've learned along the way. And so there is a lot of things that we've learned. We've learned about how people are coming back across the globe. And my colleague, John Jordan, is going to speak to that. So I'm going to turn it over to him. And John, if you want to tell us a little bit about what's been happening across the Greater China region, I'll turn it over to you now.
Sure. Thank you, Don. So from my experience, I've been in China, working in China for a number of years, both in Beijing and Shanghai, and both remotely from New York. And clearly this situation has changed a lot for all of us. From the view from China, I think there are a few items that we can share with you in regards to getting back to work and what the implications have been there. So of course, in working with our clients at Gensler, we've heard a lot of different things about what they've seen in terms of coming back to work, and both, dealing with our developer clients in terms of their strategies with dealing with this crisis. And from that, we've had five findings and evolving trends that we'd like to share with you, and these revolve around coordinating return to work efforts that will ease confusion. So that revolves around having a plan that these things need to be staged in terms of migrating people from home back to work. The buildings have considerations in terms of how they plan for these evolving conditions. Fourth is, employees will value workplace, obviously that sense of community and support that's missing from a work at home. Those types of engagements are still very valuable. And then from working from home, obviously this is, for many of us, like me, working from home has always been a part of my daily routine. So it's been quite easy to transition. And companies like ours have been pretty resilient to these conditions in terms of us having a robust interface for people to be able to leverage working from home. So starting with coordinating return to work efforts, what we've seen in China is that there's a huge benefit to having a plan, and those need to be calibrated to what different cities and states and countries are doing. And those involve a lot of different types of planning based on where you are. Buildings, buildings have different types of check-in policies. We've seen in Shanghai, especially, the buildings that our company operates in, excuse me, is, excuse me, got a little frog in my throat. Um, you know, basically you cannot get into the buildings without masks, and people are wearing masks virtually all day long together. This is a system that is very normal in parts of Asia, in China. When people are sick, people sometimes come to work sick. So people do wear masks, and that those are usual things that are occurring. So obviously the use of masks, having everyone using masks mitigates the transmission quite substantially. We've seen everything, some people take it, to different degrees in terms of their own personal protection. You've probably seen that at grocery stores where you're at in terms of eye protection and all sorts of gear. We could probably go into a whole myriad of different types of things I've seen in China in terms of people's own personal protection devices. Companies are also prioritizing office operations and teams based in work groups for returning to work strategies. So for instance, our company, we have several studios, and within those studios there are specific project teams. And a way that we've started to move forward is bringing people in just based on project teams. And obviously individual family circumstances are also driving this, as children are home, and childcare is being falling back to parents during this time. This also all will need to be coordinated. The second option, right, is or point is that when people are coming back to work, individuals, especially what we've seen in China, that people are coming back, like I said, in terms of at different times. Obviously, if you're in a big city, public transportation plays a big role in. You want to limit the amount of people maybe mixing in big groups. So what we've done is people are coming in later or earlier to miss that rush hour traffic potential, to mitigate the effects of traveling in large packs. And then, of course, like I said, with project teams, we've slowly been bringing people back to work, and part of that is also to build people's comfortability. As I mentioned on the last time, that people were very afraid when this first occurred in China, and there was a lot of anxiety around returning to work. So I think these methodologies also return trust between the employee and the company or workplace that people are returning to. Further, we've also seen that owners of buildings have also instituted their own quarantine procedures in terms of people traveling to areas that are more heavily infected than others, which might be something that you want to institute. Our building in particular has a 14-day quarantine if you go flying to cities that have been heavily affected, and a 7-day quarantine if you leave the city limits of Shanghai. The third one, as we mentioned, were building considerations for returning to work. If you've ever traveled to China, I think how people enter. There's a lot of security personnel, and that has been a benefit in China in terms of checking temperatures at key access points. In some cases, people are being checked 10 times a day, depending on how many different buildings that you enter, including your apartment building. So at every threshold of access, you'll be temperature checked. For instance, my wife's company, they issue her a mask every day. Those things are also should be part of the building considerations for people entering. HVAC systems and supply air, those things are very important, I think, moving forward in terms of air circulation. I think you would have to work through that with your local vendor to see what's the appropriate thing to do there. In terms of elevators, conference rooms, and other small spaces, we've instituted limited capacity using signage to make sure that people honor, for smaller conference rooms, the appointed occupant load. that was discussed internally with our own community, and what was necessary, that was deemed necessary by our management. And of course, as Don had mentioned, janitorial services are incredibly important at this point. What we did in Shanghai, again, to build that trust and to make sure that everything was safe for people to come back, they did a thorough cleaning of the entire office. Obviously, this means all surfaces need to be sanitized, and to ensure that there's no transmission. Obviously, areas that are not able to have direct sunlight are probably the most at risk. And for employees, will continue to value the workplace. I mean, that's where your organization culture is incubated, and that's what we want to bring as we bring back. We want to rebuild that sense of safety and community that is so important to our workplaces. And as I mentioned, commuting and public transit is also a concern, and being, maybe having an internal plan about how people, deal with their own journeys is very important. As I mentioned, masks are paramount in Asia, and you can China's a little more severe than the U.S. in terms of personal freedoms, but I think implicitly masks are important. So in China, if you're not wearing a mask, you can be fined. You can get into a lot of trouble. So making people aware that it's for everyone's safety, and there is a kind of mutuality there in terms of the community is something to engender. And again, I'm actually been working away for a while, so I do miss interacting with my colleagues. As I mentioned, my wife is in Shanghai, and I'm actually stuck in the United States. So everybody is under these kind of stresses, and again, trying to get normalcy back to your daily life is definitely something that I'm sure everyone desires as they return back to work. And then, of course, both ergonomic seating and collaborative environments. This kind of leads into the last point in terms of working from home as well, but finding ways to, make sure that your home office or the way that you're working is set up well. And of course, when you return to work, that people are comfortable, as Don mentioned, is really paramount to the situation. And finally, as I was alluding to, the work from home will continue. The projections are that this pandemic is perhaps not over. In terms of the last 100-year event with the Spanish flu, and also with H1N1, there are predictions that there will be a second, third, potentially even a fourth wave of this. And so being ready for that, having robust systems for people to work from home, and pre-planning for those conditions will probably help us avoid some of the restrictions that we faced this time around. Thank you very much. Appreciate
John.
the time. But in terms of advice from our friends in China, using this time to experiment with technology if you felt like you were behind. I mean, this is something that we're currently working through with clients, from Gensler's side in terms of our own, strategizing with our clients and helping them find policies and systems that can make their workplace more resilient. Following hygiene protocols. I mean, I think we all understand that washing our hands was one of the #1 ways to limit some of the transmissions. I've mentioned masks many times. I think we learned a valuable lesson about what Asia was doing, that it actually worked quite well. And of course, be considerate to others. This is a difficult time, and we're all in this together. Thank you.
Communications, right? First and foremost, thank you to IFMA and Gensler for the opportunity to share our thinking here. As I look forward and actually reflect on what John has shared from his experience in China, and what Don has laid out as design strategies, here at Ford, we're very much aligned with those strategies, as well as the learnings we've had from our own colleagues in China, what they've endured and how they've returned back to work. So at Ford, we're keeping all our designs, our processes, and communications centered around that employee experience. And we keep looking through the lens of the employee. Not one of our employees expected to be working from home for this long of an extended time when they left. It was pretty abrupt when they left, and they never thought they were going to be working from home that long, let alone now what's happening around the world. How do I return to work? And for those that will keep working at home, what can we do to ensure that they're socially connected? All of that is in our thinking of what lens we use for our employees. So we came up with a strategy as far as communications, and it's multifaceted. We do have weekly huddles with our CEO and the officers of the company that everybody logs into, that's available, and listens in. So you get kind of a corporate sense. You understand their thinking and how we're going, which has been well received by our employees. The second element that we're doing is playbooks. Manufacturing has different circumstances than what we have in the non-manufacturing or our office setting. So we have created 2 playbooks that we're going to have to share with the employees, and it's going to be very interactive with the employees. And it's basically walking through them a number of steps. What have we done to get our facilities ready? How are we going to maintain the protocols of the facility, and what role do they play in that, from hygiene to cleaning and what's expected of them? We'll demonstrate where we've been able to expand our air circulations in the building, and we're going to spend a lot of time on their first moment back at the work site, which is the entry experience. At Ford, masks will be mandatory in all of our sites, as well as thermal scanning. So that first entry into the lobby, that experience, will include a thermal scan, as well as being assigned PPE if they don't have it, or if they want to switch from what they have been riding, as John's explained, with public transportation and others. And even prior to hitting that lobby, we're asking them to answer daily a 4 questions just to certify that they're feeling good, they haven't traveled anywhere. It's kind of a self-certification attestation that all of them will flash that they've taken it, and they'll get a QR code on their phone to proceed. From the playbook, we've set up a supplemental more for the visual learnings and just to kind of curate that experience that we've written in our playbooks. And it's going to kind of walk them through some of the experiences that they'll have, so they'll be able to visualize what that entry experience is going to be. They're going to see what it means if they have to get onto that elevator, and the social distancing with the demarcations of, how to keep your distance within the elevator and what those new reduced capacities are, and all of those things, whether it's escalators, whether it's what kind of food is going to be prepared. All the self-serve food is being suspended at this time, but we're going to offer a touchless pre-order, of boxed lunches, and this is how you'll go about it, and this is what it looks like. We're even exploring setting up little grocery stores in some of the areas to help with those people that come to the work site. If they can get those critical few items that's hard to find, is there a way that we can provide that service to them? So we're exploring that as well. So from the video, we now are cascading through our people leaders. So these are like the activity leads. They'll do a touch point, kind of more personalized for the activity level requirements. And then from there, we're going to do a building level with some of the site people. The site team will be a cross-functional team with operations, our Ford Land facility team, as well as the HR community, and bringing it to a specific building that an employee works with. So we're reaching multiple levels, each with very specific audiences, with very specific messages, and a lot of Q&A, because we want to, again, earn their trust, and we want to ensure that we're giving them and reducing any kind of stressor that they may be feeling or bringing back into the workplace. So a lot in the building will be with visual cues, keeping your 6 feet apart, social distancing of workstations, as well as the other sensories. Does the smell of that workplace exude one that is clean and sanitized? We used to do all our cleaning on the off shift where no one could see it was done and not visible. do we switch that to a shift where it's more visible to give that reassurance to the people that their workplaces are being cleaned and sanitized? So we're learning along the way. It's very complex. It's been very complex for us. All the different ordinances are all over, of having over 2,000 buildings across the globe here, and each of them brings a different level of complexity to our operations and our designs of our workplace. So details are very important, and at this point, the ground game's got to focus on the execution and bring it home. Don, I think I'll turn it to you.
Oh, sounds good. Thanks. So we're going to take a couple questions right now, and I'll just leave this slide up here as we ask some of these. So this can go to any one of us, but somebody had asked, what are some of the recommendations that you have for organizing building lobbies, or what are some of the things you've seen that others are doing in building lobbies to bring people back in? So I don't know if Jackie, if you want to expand on some of the things you were sharing about how Ford's looking at it, or John, if you had any insights from your experiences with in Shanghai.
I guess I'll go first. That's all right, John. What we're really concentrating on is that first moment to put their concerns, at ease. That experience, again, thermal scanning, so those large installs of where the people are returning, we're going to have more of a tripod thermal scanner imaging set up. The individual's going to obviously arrive with a mask on since it's mandatory, walk through the thermal scanning thing, and it only takes within seconds of getting that surface temperature, and that, if it's at within the acceptable parameters, they proceed to their workstation. If it's exceeding it, they're given a piece of paper where it's advised that they should contact their doctor, and then they return back home. So that's kind of what we're thinking about it. Now, if a queue should get up and gather at some of these sites, we have set up that experience has the right physical distancing between people as they wait to walk through those scanners. For some of our smaller installs, it'll be a handheld thermometer scan, and it will be administered by a nurse. Same similar, simple process.
Okay, thanks. John, is there anything you wanted to add to that, or anything that you had that was maybe similar or different, thinking about your experience in Shanghai or what the Shanghai office has gone through?
And that sounds pretty similar to the procedures that I'm aware of in China. I think the conditions are, what if someone, having a fallback plan if someone does not have a mask, what do you do? Are there masks that can be issued? Are they turned away? Again, I think a lot of this is about planning. And I think there was another question that dovetailed into this, is what do you do when someone has it? Obviously, Jackie's one was, issuing a piece of paper. In China, they'll actually take you directly to the hospital. So I think having those planning in place to those conditions is pretty important.
No, that's great. It's good to know the details around this. I think that's ultimately what everybody's looking for. Just the other day, I was talking about the return to work with one of my other clients, and they talked about the lobby in the buildings that they own, or they're the single tenant. And they talked about it in three zones, and the three zones were, zone one was the entry and the queue. So they know that there's going to be some aspect of staging, if you will, as intake. And that's part of why they were wanting to talk in more detail about staggering or shifts, so that they can figure out how to minimize the wait so that it doesn't feel like a TSA experience. And then the second zone was the scanning, the physical scanning, and the understanding of what to do, and how many thermal scanning stations was still part of what they were figuring out, was with respect to population and what they could process through. And then the third stage, or the third zone, was specific to, if you're cleared to go through, then it was a secondary sort of queue or area that got you to the elevator. And then there was also the coordination around stairwells and making sure that the stairwells were identified as either a stairwell dedicated to going up or a stairwell to coming down. So again, a lot of considerations about what to do at the base of the building, whether you're a single tenant or a multi-tenant. But I thought those were some, interesting facts that.
Yeah, I think another item here is also, visitors. What's the visitor experience in terms? I mean, what we've seen in China is a lot of people aren't coming to visit us because many people, elect to do online meetings at this stage. But we have hosted meetings in the office, and having a protocol for engagement is also important to plan for. Also food deliveries and packages, all the kind of things that come into buildings. If you don't have a mail room or a loading dock area, I think those are also there needs to be a planning for that as well.
Cool. Let's see, I'm just grabbing from a couple other lists of questions here. So one of them was, when thinking about working from home, is it fair to say that the workspace could reduce in size if more people work from home? And what are some of the tools out there to determine if work from home is working? So I think I'll kind of tackle that one, and you guys can add on. So coincidentally, up on the screen, we do have one of the tools that Gensler offers, which is a work from home survey that helps you understand kind of what you were doing before the outbreak, how you've been working now. So what is your experience in actually working from home, and what are the things that you are going to need in the event that you're going to be working from home as just part of the mix. So it's a good way to understand and identify what are the needs, what are the things people are missing. And we have launched we've launched the survey already, and we do have some high level findings. And I think that the things that are missing, or the things that people are looking for, are again, they're pretty basic, but it's things like ergonomics in the work environment. So we've actually had people ask if in our office, could they go back to the office and borrow a chair because they're working at home, sitting at a counter or sitting at a makeshift work environment. And the other was technology, and primarily was about screen size. And that seems to be the two biggest things that, again, super high level and pretty basic, but those are the things that are being integrated as part of the work from home for the future. And then the question about, in the future, would we expect to see, work from home as a strategy that would ultimately reduce space? And the answer to that is, most likely yes, but to what degree? I think it's all going to depend on the activities that people need to perform in the work environment and why they would go to the workplace. And so this idea around reducing space, off the cuff, we're not in the position right now to talk about how much that might be, but I think it's safe to say that, while people spread out in the work environment, when collaboration spaces get a little larger, it's going to offset some of that people working from home. So it won't be about density, it'll be about comfort. And if you start to put all that together, right now we're thinking of it as it'll stay the same. But the truth is, like anything with new behaviors and new habits, you would expect to find some level of efficiency. So I guess the short answer is yes, there would be some efficiency there. I don't know if you guys had any other, we've got a list of questions that have been rolling in, but I don't know if Jackie or John, if you had a chance to look, was there one more we wanted to tackle before we wrap up today? If you guys didn't have one handy, I think we can always follow up with some of the folks that have sent in the questions as well, so we can do this as another follow-up.
So I was just, Don, I would just like to add to the last question, right? Some of the facilities around the world had a strong muscle behind work from home. There's some areas at Ford Motor Company where our culture was coming in and collaborating, heavily based being on site together. So this last month and a half has been quite a journey for many people, but it's exciting to see that the muscle behind working from home and how effective it can be needs to be maintained. And we too have a survey out to our employees. It's right on our website there. And we're gathering that information about, from a supervisor's perspective, are you effective? Is the team effective? And from the employee, is it effective or not effective? And it's all at a time when you know, a lot of the people with young children are becoming their teacher at the same time, or elder care and stuff. So the stresses are great. So whatever we can do to help release them, very similar, Don, right? My dining room chair is good to sit in for 2 hours, but now that I'm here for a month and a half, can I go get my chair or my larger computer because I'm an engineer, right? With dual screens and that. So very similar experiences.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's I would say similar to the Gensler culture. We were ready to work from home. Just as an organization around the globe, we naturally collaborate with all of our offices. Just being able to have John on the call from Shanghai is a great example. We're fortunate in that he is stuck in the US with us for now, but at the same time, having a platform behind you that allows you to access all the files you need is only part of it. The other part of it is that face-to-face interaction, that strategic thinking, that design thinking that does require, seeing the expression on somebody's face, understanding if we're all on the same page. And I think those are the things that we're all missing. I'd say probably similar to the work we've done with you, Jackie, right? We know that there's a lot of engineers who need access to assets and stuff and parts and things. So all of that comes critical as to why the workplace is important. So with that, I thought we could wrap it up here. Thanks again to IFMA for allowing us the opportunity to talk and to share our information and share our tools. We'll turn it back to you, Chris. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Don. And on behalf of IFMA, I want to give a huge thank you to Don, Jackie, and John, the panelists. Thank you so much for all of the insights. And also a really huge thank you to everybody who's been following along with our FM COVID-19 webinar series. We do have some other episodes coming up. So today we're doing a re-entering the workplace strategic framework. So that'll be episode 6. And then on May 13th, we're planning how to prepare in the event of a relapse or reclosure. So again, you can find those on our go-to stage or on our IFMA Coronavirus Resource Center at ifma.org/coronavirus. And then also one other update before we go, the IFMA Foundation has put together an updated pandemic preparedness manual, and we do expect to publish that shortly. So please be on the lookout for that. That'll be in IFMA's Knowledge Library. Again, thank you to all the attendees for attending, and thank you so much to the panelists for all the great insight.